In the previous video, we had added a palette to userlib, this one, and in this video we will be adding 3 subpalettes to this main palette. So let's go and write the code for our VI. Let's save it and call it adding subpalettes. The first thing in this video, we will be adding 3 subpalettes, and we would need the path to where our previously created palette menu is. For that, we will need property node, we will be using the application directory path property, we will be building a path in the Windows in the LabVIEWs directory. Let's create a constant, path constant, and let's browse for path. We will be going to program files, then to National Instruments, LabVIEW version we are using, and inside that we will find the userlib, and inside that we will find the menu we had created in the previous example. Let's select it. Let's keep the path relative. Let's remove all this. It's a good habit to use relative paths. Then we will be using read palette VI to read the information from this menu file we had already created, and let's tell it that the palette type is functions. From that, next we will be creating more paths, but for that we would need to unbundle by name function. We use it to extract the palette data, and from the palette data what we need is palette items, which is an array, and we will be creating a constant, but we don't need the array constant. We will be building that. What we need is the cluster that's present inside it. Let's delete this array, and we will need this cluster for bundling and we would use this for building path to our first submenu. So we will build a path to the LabVIEW application directory, and then we would point this to, in our first example, we will point it to an existing menu file that LabVIEW uses. Let's browse for path. Let's go to program files, National Instruments, LabVIEW version V, and inside that we would find a menus folder. Inside that we will find categories. Inside that, the menu that we want is programming, and inside that we are interested in this array menu. We want to create this array menu in, we want to copy this array pre-made default menu that LabVIEW uses in our submenu. Let's save it. Let's change it to relative path. We'll cut it from here. Let's add, that's enough. So now we will bundling this information, bundle by name, and for a template to the bundle we will use this constant item path. This is the item we want to use, and we will give it a short name. Our submenu will give it a short name. Let's say, let's call it standard LabVIEW array, or let's just simplify it. Let's call it standard palette. We'll use it later. Let's create another one. Let's copy this create path. We will use the default path, LabVIEW path. Then we'll copy this constant, and we will point it to, in this second item we would be using a library which contains the menu item that we want to show and the library that we want to show inside that menu. So let's point it to that. For this example, let's go back to program files, National Instruments, LabVIEW 2019, and then let's go to instrument library, which contains instrument already contains an pre-installed instrument library for Agilent 34401, and inside that we have a public folder, and inside that we have utility folder, and inside it is the menu that we need, which is utility menu. This is the menu that we want to use, and we would be using relative path from here. We have the LabVIEW path already, so let's connect this, and we would use another bundle Let's use the same constant, and the item path would be the one we just created. And then we will need a library path. We will be providing it a pre-built library, and for that we need to create a new path. The first portion will be the folder would be where the LabVIEW installed, and the second portion would be a library. Let's browse for path. Let's go to C drive, program files, National Instruments, LabVIEW 2019, instrument lib, Agilent 34401, and inside that we will find Agilent 34401 LabVIEW lib. We want this library in its entirety to populate our menu, and we would be using relative path up to the LabVIEW folder. Let's pass this one on, and let's give it a short name. The menu that the name by which we want to we want this submenu to show. Let's call it LabVIEW lib palette. And for our third example, third type of menu, we would be using a default library, pre-built default library. Let's browse. Let's go to C drive, program files, National Instruments. Let's go to our version of LabVIEW. This time we will be going to VILib folder. Inside there is a folder called utility. Inside that we have config.llb folder. Let's go inside, and inside that we have nilv config.lvlib. Let's select this one. Okay, let's convert it to relative path from here, since we already have the path to where LabVIEW is installed in this wire. Let's copy this. Let's connect it to this constant. Library path, we will be using this one. Let's change it, since we are already using a default library. Let's use this boolean, which is use default library palette. Yes, let's turn it to true. Yes, we are. And let's create a short name for it. Let's call it default LabVIEW lib palette. Next we need to create these menu items. We need to insert these into already created menu that we had already created previously. Let's build an array. Build array. Let's pass it this array, and let's add these 3 new elements to it. Next we will be unbundle. We will be bundling it. Let's connect this input cluster to this one we extracted earlier. Let's set it to items, and we will be bundling this back, this change and the change array with 3 more items for subpalette back into the palette information. For that we will use write palette function. We'll pass this information to it, and the path to the menu file, we'll pass it along, and we will set it to palette type as functions. Next we will be refreshing the palette. Refresh palettes, and lastly we would be error handling. So let's connect the error wires through. So we are done with coding. Let's clean up the block diagram. And next we will be testing the code. So let's go and test our code. Let me turn on execution highlighting so we can see how the code progresses. Let's run the VI. So we are creating the paths to the menus. We have read the LabVIEW default path. We have read the menu we had created earlier. We are building the new menu items, and Houston, we have a problem here, and NASA just contacted me saying that it's not their job to solve every problem, and besides it's not programming if it's run smoothly the first time. So I went ahead, removed the 2 dots here, and lowercase the palette names, and let's rerun. Let's see if this gets the problem fixed. So we are creating paths, reading the menus, that is fine, and passing it the array, and the error persists. So let's go and debug it. And the problem seems to be that this is the path to a library, and I have selected item path here. Let's change it to library path. So let's run it again and hope that we have fixed the problem, with fingers crossed. So paths are being created. The VI has read the existing path, menu path, and it's now about to write new menus, and it seems to be okay. Palettes are being refreshed as the mouse cursor is showing, and we are done. So let's go and check if the menus have been created. Right click, expand, go to user libraries, and our previous library is there, and new palettes have been added. Here is the standard palette, the array palette that we had added. Second one was the one with which we had borrowed from instrument driver for Agilent. It's been added. And the third one was the default one, and it's also been added, which we had added for the config files. So everything seems to be working fine, and this is how you can programmatically add sub palettes, name them, and add it to existing palette of your own. Hope that this helped. If it did, please keep visiting for more videos, and thanks for watching.